Well, the story that we just heard in the gospel is it takes her in an interesting place, I think. You may know, you may understand, or you may remember from your days in catechism class, or things that have been mentioned, or maybe something you read somewhere. The gospel story that we heard today is a little bit of a brief foray into a different passage than we think that we would normally have heard. Every year in the Catholic Church, every Sunday, we have a cycle of readings. You may know this. Every year there's a different cycle of gospel readings. It's a 3-year cycle. So for example, last year's cycle, we were listening to the Gospel of Matthew all year. This year, we're listening to the Gospel of Mark all year. Next year, we're going to listen to the Gospel of Luke all year. So last weekend, you remember the baptism of the Lord. That was St. Mark's version of that story. Jesus goes into the water, the heavens are rent open, the Holy Spirit comes down in the form of a dove, the Father's voice, "This is my beloved Son. I'm well pleased with my Son." And so we would assume that we would just continue with the Gospel of Mark, but we get this 1-week detour because today you heard from the Gospel of John, which is outside the norm. What's going on? Why is the church doing that? John, right, we just heard, with the passage we just heard is the beginning, right, of John's story of Jesus. Last week in the baptism of the Lord, that was sort of the initiation of Jesus' public ministry, where he goes from living a life at home taking care of his mom into a life of public ministry and discipleship and evangelization and saving the world in all kinds of new ways. So the initiation of that story, which we heard in Mark, we are now also kind of hearing here in the first chapter of John's gospel. A couple years ago, I heard what to me was one of the best interpretations of these verses, and it actually came from a man by the name of Curtis Martin, who is your boss, Joseph. Curtis Martin is the founder and president of the organization Focus, Fellowship of Catholic University Students, who do a lot of evangelization on college campuses across the country. And I was at a conference a few years ago where he spoke on this very passage. And I know that how much you know about the writer of John the Evangelist. He uses details sometimes for really important reasons. He'll say things, and we even heard that in today's gospel. 3 times in like 7 verses, he says this word, and it translates into that word. He wants to make sure that people understand what he means. And so these Hebrew words that are translated into Greek 3 times, why do we need to know that? Well, John has his reasons, right? So it's interesting that when we listen to this gospel story, what fascinates me is one of the details that John the Evangelist gives is that there were 2 disciples of John the Baptist that listened to what John the Baptist say when he pointed to Jesus and said, "That's the Lamb of God." And John writes the name of one of those 2 disciples, Andrew, the future apostle. And although Andrew is the only one of the 2 that is named, by pious tradition and by the writings of the mystics and the saints, it has been understood in Christian tradition that the second of those apostles was John Evangelist himself. So John Evangelist and Andrew the apostle were disciples of John the Baptist. And so we listen, actually, in this section, at the first chapter of the gospel of John's account of the life of Jesus, he's actually recounting, in the third person, a story of his own personal experience. So this gives context to some of the details that he's using in these verses, which are really helpful for us to ponder on because it helps us to understand not only why John was doing this, but what this has to do with you. So you notice a couple of those, what appeared to be random details. He says, "Rabbi." Oh, that's translated teacher, right? He says, "We have found the Messiah." Oh, that means the Christ, the anointed one. Oh, you shall be called Cephas. That's translated Peter. That means rock. Well, one of the other details that seems to just go by in this passage is when John says, "Rabbi, where are you staying? Come and see." They went and stayed with him that day. It was about 4 PM. And then Andrew, the brother of Simon, went and found Simon and said, "We found the Messiah." There seems to be a throwaway sentence about the fact that it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, why do we need to know that? It doesn't seem to be important to the story. Until we understand that John is the one telling this story in the third person about his own life. John is speaking about the moment where he leaves his discipleship with John the Baptist and becomes the disciple of Jesus. And when he's writing this gospel passage, he's now 80 or 90 years old, right? He's far removed from this moment by 30, 40, 50 years. So he's writing history from way back when, about a day in my life on that random Wednesday. And John is able to reflect upon this moment and understand that that was the moment that the course of his life changed forever. It was a seminal moment in John's life, the day that he went to become a disciple of Jesus. And in those kinds of experiences that alter the course of your life, tend to be quite memorable to you in their details. Even the random things that don't really apply to anybody but you look back and you can recall that moment and you can say something like John would say, I remember the day that I followed Jesus. I remember the day that he called me. I remember the day that I saw him for the first time and knew that he was the Lamb of God. I knew my life was changing that day. I remember my first steps that I took to follow him. Yeah, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Details for the 4 o'clock moment, right? The 4 o'clock moment is, spiritually speaking, right, those moments of good changes where God intervenes and you are transformed in some way, large or small. So Joseph, for example, would you say that the day that you proposed to your bride was a 4 o'clock moment in your life that transformed your life? Yeah. Okay. Do you remember that day in detail? Incredibly. Okay, how much did you sleep the night before? So you did get good sleep the night before. Would you say 6 hours, 8 hours, normal amount? Do you remember what you ate for breakfast that morning? Or did you eat breakfast that morning? I might have skipped breakfast. Do you remember what Krista was wearing when you proposed to her? What time of day did you propose to her? It was about 2 in the afternoon. Where were you? Mount St. Mary's. Do you remember what part of Mount St. Mary's you were standing? Yes. Where? And what was Crystal's first words to you when you proposed to her? Or did she just start crying? I believe the word was yes. Crystal, was that the word? Was it yes? Joseph has more details about that day. Joseph, was there a random detail about that day that nobody would possibly know, that you could just pull out of your mind about that day? There you go. Specific details about a 4 o'clock moment in your life, Joseph. How many years ago was that now? 20 odd years. 20 odd years ago it must be. 10 years ago. And yet, because of the significance of that moment, there are details about, so now tell me this, Joseph. The following Wednesday, what did you have for breakfast? Nobody knows. Do you know if anybody called you on the phone that day? Nope. Do you remember if it was sunny or rainy? Nope. Do you remember how many hours you slept the night before that other random Wednesday? No, certainly not. So John's making a really good point. when he's giving us these kind of details, when he's speaking about something in his life that changed him, right? It's called the 4 o'clock moment. And that was something really helpful to me that I heard from Curtis Martin right at that conference. Now, here's the shift, right? Here's where we move forward from that. The truth is this: 4 o'clock moments in your life are not just and only these super seminal moments where maybe you proposed to your wife, or you were ordained a priest, or maybe the day you won the lottery. I don't know if that's any of us, but we all have these kind of 4 o'clock moments. And what is that actually? The 4 o'clock moment happens when the good thing that you really want has arrived. Okay, Andrew, John the Evangelist, disciples of John the Baptist, what do they know? They're good disciples of John the Baptist. So they know from John the Baptist that John is not the Messiah, but that he is the one who's going to herald the Messiah, the one that they were looking for in their own hearts. And when John the Baptist says, that's the one, some desire in their hearts were now like, okay, it's go time, life's changing, let's move. They recognized the desire that they had of the good thing that was within them. And when the good thing came, they knew life was going to change. Anybody here have a 4 o'clock moment at the end of the workday? Yeah, of course you have. Because what happens throughout your workday? You're like, I can't wait for that good thing that's about to come, and when it comes, I'm going to feel awesome. You walk out your door of your workplace, and you're like, can't wait to go home. And then you have another 4 o'clock moment. Because in the drive on the way home, you're like, you want to know what I know is in the refrigerator? Leftover spaghetti from last night. I'm going to smash that as soon as I get home. That's another 4 o'clock moment. It's a good thing that's arrived in your life that you're anticipating. And when it's there and you sit down after you put it in the microwave for 3 minutes and 30 seconds, because you know that's exactly how long it takes to heat that up. And that first bite, you're like, oh, this is so good. It's like I've never eaten spaghetti in my life. And then you're like, I can't wait. I know that this weekend I'm not going to have to turn on my alarm. I'm going to get a chance to sleep in. Now, if you're a mother or father of young children, unfortunately, that's not your experience. But maybe for the rest of us, it's like, all right, I know that this weekend I'm going to go see such and such. Or I'm going to go get to do this fun thing. Or I know that I'm simply going to be able to shut off my alarm and sleep for as long as I think I'm going to sleep. And that's a 4 o'clock moment. That's a moment that you and I anticipate because we know that there's going to be an intervention that satisfies a desire. We are invited, when listening to a story such as this, to reflect upon our own lives, and this is something maybe for this week for you, and to say, what are those in my life because they're there? And they're not simply and only there in the huge things, they're actually there every day. Every day of your life, you wake up with the hope of a 4 o'clock moment in some fashion. And that desire for your happiness, that desire for your good, that desire for your fulfillment usually follows one of these tracks. Firstly, your own bodily needs. You're going to wake up hungry. You're going to want to eat some cereal or have a coffee. Coffee for us, for many, is a 4 o'clock moment, right? Your bodily needs are taken care of. That's an intervention of God in your life for the sake of your blessing. But then it moves up from there because you don't simply seek fulfillment in your body. You also seek fulfillment in your skills, in your mind, and your abilities so that you know that you're going to go to work that day, or you're going to go to your place of employment, or you're going to go to your school, and you're going to say, I know that I have these tasks, these objectives. Or you have something in your life, you say, I'm going to run a marathon this year. I'm going to buy a bike this year. I'm going to learn how to play an instrument this year. There is self-fulfillment in your own mind with your skills and your knowledge that you seek to bring about. Those are also 4 o'clock moments. They bring that kind of happiness. And it doesn't end there, because you also have a desire not simply for your own good to build up yourself. You and I are also born with a desire to fill up the world, to fill up those around us in acts of service and love. When you and I go outside of ourselves to bring joy and happiness and help to someone else, when we serve our community, that is a deeper, even larger 4 o'clock moment. Giving of ourselves. And the deepest, the most profound, the most needful of all of our 4 o'clocks is the highest level of happiness, fulfillment in our life, and that is the desire that we have to be one with God. When we get to places in our life where nothing else simply satisfies, no matter how hard we try, no matter what it is we look for, we know that there's something more, there's something deeper. In fact, that there's something that is not even of this world that can be the only thing that is able to satisfy my deepest need for happiness. That is also its 4 o'clock moment. And the truth of it is, I struggle to fulfill each of those needs for happiness. There's always at least one of them that I feel like I need to work on. If you're a human being, and you are, I'm going to just go ahead and guess that you're just like me. That there are desires, there are 4 o'clocks of different levels in your life that you know too, that you're like, oh man, I'm seeking for this and I haven't found it, or I'm not working on it, or I would like it to come about. Sometimes those 4 o'clock moments are difficult because we know, well, I have to walk through maybe a kind of a thorny door in order to access that kind of happiness. And I'm not ready for that thorny door yet. Maybe something like that is at work. But this, to take, I would say, maybe an even more profound step from that recognition would be this. The biggest challenge in my life in regard to a story such as this is the knowledge that I tend to believe that my 4 o'clock moments are things that are in the future that I'm looking forward to. And probably most of us would imagine it similarly. When such and such, then I'll have arrived. When I get to the end of the workday, then I'll be happy. When I finally get that spaghetti in the microwave and on the table and in my belly, then I'll be happy. When I finally learn to play that new instrument, or when I finally, get up the courage to run that half marathon, then I'll have that satisfaction. But here's the kicker. Does God intend for your 4 o'clock moments to simply be before you? I step back and I ask myself, well, what about Jesus? What about Jesus' 4 o'clock moments? What did he think about those? I was driving back down to Jackson this morning, praying the rosary on the way down, and I was going through each of the mysteries, and I'm like, oh man, that was a 4 o'clock moment in Jesus' life. That man, he was looking forward to that moment. He had great satisfaction in that moment. That kind of epiphany he had that. I was in the mystery and the ascension, right? We had that stained glass window right here. Man, was that 4 o'clock in Jesus' life, where he knew this is a good thing. My life's journey is changing forever in this moment. Finally, the satisfaction, all the things that I was made to do and accomplish on this, and it's all going back to Dad in heaven. But then I was like, well, my gosh, Jesus' 4 o'clock moment certainly were these large things, but I have to suspect this. Jesus knew that every 4 o'clock moment in his life was right now. And that is a big change in the way that we think about happiness and the way that we think about God's plan and think about our life's journey and our journey of faith. Do you ever think that your moments of satisfaction are in the present, not in the future? And if we were to live as if our 4 o'clocks were in the present moment, how would that change our life? How would that be transformative for us? In my heart, I solemnly believe that God plans for my 4 o'clocks to be wherever I am. That the grace of his transformation wants to meet me in this moment, not simply in the anticipation of something to come, because it changes the way I live in my present moment. But if I never have that thought, or if I always assume that the good has not yet arrived, I'm going to miss out on a whole lot of opportunities where I could have received, participated in, responded to the gift of God's happiness that I simply didn't recognize because I was paying attention to something else. So that's your homework. You have homework this week. I'm not going to grade you. But in your heart, you'll know that this would be maybe something God is inviting you to, particularly because you just heard it today. So how about have this for your food this week? Can you take 2 or 3, 4, 5, 10 minutes out of your day, someday this week, sit with yourself and just say, what are my 4 o'clocks? What are my 4 o'clocks today or this week or this year? Where do I need to be satisfied in my body, in my mind, in my heart, and in my soul? And am I able to see those not only as future things, good things that are going to come into my life, but can I also recognize those in present moments in my here and now, so that I'm not waiting for my transformation, but I'm responding to it in the present.